Ever since Riftbound League of Legends TCG released in English, players have been waiting to see whether the new regions that got access to the game would follow suit with the Chinese meta, where Kai'Sa and Master Yi proved to be the most dominant decks by a landslide. The biggest indicator of the English meta is going to be the Houston Regional, which is the first major Riftbound event set to take place in the United States on December 6th. But in the meantime, there are other cash and grassroots tournaments that players have been testing their brews in to see if there is any room for innovation in the Riftbound Origins meta. Today, we're taking a look at the top 8 decks from the PPG Pro Play Summit Qualifier that took place in Orlando over the weekend. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't find any info on how many players attended this event, so if you know, please let us know down in the comments, and let's get started taking a look at our first place Ahri build. Seeing Ahri take place here is super fascinating. Now, I should caveat that by saying the level of fascination is probably going to be determined a little bit more so by the number of players that were in attendance for this event once we find that out. But I do want to point out that I saw a lot of conversation in the community this weekend talking about how Ahri seemingly matches up well into Kai'Sa. Now, I wonder if that was just conversation sparked from the hype of Ahri winning an event like this, or if there's a little bit more to it and actually some precedent for why that might be the case. So let's take a look at this first place Ahri build. First thing to note is the battlefields. I think that Dreaming Tree and Grove of the Godwillow are super standard for Ahri. I mean, you are playing a deck that wants to hold and a deck that plays a lot of battle buffs that target its own units. So those two make a ton of sense. War Camp, though, is definitely pretty interesting, but I think the cool thing about War Camp is that it gives your unit a permanent might modifier, which actually puts you out of range of certain removal spells. Let's take our chosen champion Ahri Inquisitive, for example. If that thing is sitting in Trifarian War Camp, it is now out of range of dying to one Falling Star proc. Your opponent would have to either combo Falling Star and Stupefy, or just use both procs of Falling Star on the Ahri Inquisitive. So that's a fascinating reason to play something like a Trifarian War Camp. Very, very cool, and I think smart decisions on the battlefields here. Let's go through the rest of the main board. I see, firstly, a million spells that proc off of Dreaming Tree and are otherwise just good spells. We have, of course, 3 Stupefy, 3 On Guard, 3 Retreat, and 3 Discipline. I think 3 Retreat is probably a little bit new for most Ahri builds. This is definitely a 2 to 3 of in most Kai'Sa builds, and that's one of the main things you're looking to do in the mirror match is retreat when your opponent is targeting your unit with a removal-based spell. But there's not really a reason why you can't do that in Ahri, right? So makes a ton of sense. And getting the ramp on your runes is such a big deal in so many matchups. I've been finding that more and more as I've been playing Kai'Sa myself. So seeing it here in Ahri, I think is super fascinating. I want to take a look at the 2-drop lineup here. We are playing 3 copies of Stalwart Poro, 3 copies of Ravenbloom Student, and 2 copies of Watchful Sentry, supplemented by our 3 drops in Lecturing Yordle, which is interesting. I think Lecturing Yordle as a 3-drop is a fantastic card. I mean, drawing a card on play is excellent. The tank is even relevant sometimes. The only odd thing about Lecturing Yordle is that it's only super good going second if you draw it on turn 1, because obviously you can play it going second on turn 1, and you have a 3-drop in your chosen champ zone for when you go second. So maybe like Lecturing Yordle is just not as much of a turn 1 play as I'm making it out to be, but still a really strong early game lineup. I do think somewhere between 8 to 9 2-drops is really good in most decks. One, for the fact that Aurora is a thing, because you want to be able to have early drops against Aurora so you don't fall behind on points and don't ultimately get snowballed out of the game when they drop Aurora. And also, as an Ahri deck, you want to get into battlefields quickly and you want to hold them. You're almost a lot like Master Yi in that sense, where instead of giving your single defending units +2, you're punishing your opponent by taking away their might when they come to fight you. So it's a very defensive deck in that sense as well. And then for our higher unit lineup, we do have 3000 Tail Watcher, only 2 Facey Fey Folk, and 3 copies of Sprite Mother. So yes, we are trying to get into those battlefields very quickly. Couple of other supplementary cards. I mean, 3 Defy makes a ton of sense. Supplemented though by 1 Wind Wall, which can be very clutch. I mean, countering Cathian Rains, countering Time Warps, which we are playing 2 copies of ourselves here. And then we go down to the sideboard. I think Charm in the side deck and not the main is also another fascinating selection. I do wonder why you wouldn't want this in the main, because I do feel like if you're in a good position, this card is useful in just about every single matchup, because being able to move your opponent's units around and basically get that 1 cost removal on most of your opponent's key units is going to be super huge. And then we see another trend that a lot of other Ahri builds have been leaning towards, which is Ahri alluring in the sideboard, coming in for matchups where it's probably probably a little bit more likely to survive. So I think you might not want it against like the Kaisas of the world, but against like maybe your Master Yis, where you can stick it in a battlefield and then try to protect it on defense, where they have to kind of attack it via combat. That's going to be a really nice thing. So very cool to see Ahri take an event here. Again, super looking forward to learning how many players were actually at this event, but a cool thing nonetheless. I'm sure this player had to slog through many Kaisas and many Master Yis to get to this first place slot. For our second place list, we have a super unconventional version of Dazzling Aurora Master Yi. The reason I say super unconventional is because most Dazzling Aurora decks in general want to forego playing any early drop units if they can help it. And really, the reason for that is if you play Dazzling Aurora and flip a Clockwork Keeper off the top of your deck, you're going to feel pretty bad about basically playing a Clockwork Keeper for 9 energy. But this build does have some interesting caveats where it doesn't have to completely sacrifice the early game. You still have 2 drops to play. You can still contest battlefields. You can still stick those units into battlefields and get the early game value that Master Yi provides as a legend, and then still work your way towards the Dazzling Aurora strategy. Another cool thing about this build in particular is that you're sort of trading off your turn 1 plays. You've got, of course, turn 1 plays like Poro and Clockwork Keeper, but you've also got turn 1 plays like Mobilize and even Zhonya's Hourglass to set up protection for your subsequent plays. So I do wonder how builds like this might move going forward, where you're kind of hybridizing the mid-range Master Yi that would typically play like Find Your Center plus Tasty Fey Folk, and Tasty Fey Folk would be the most your top end was looking to do. Maybe you play 1 to 2 copies of White Flame Protector, but this instead is also playing the opposite side with Dazzling Aurora, where you want to usually play as many greedy high cost units as you can. Think about like those 12 drop Volley Bears, where you never really want to cast that for 12 runes, but if you can play it off Dazzling Aurora, that's like the best case scenario. This is a very interesting hybrid take on that. Looking down to the sideboard, some very standard things. I mean, a 2nd copy of Challenge for when you want a ratio fix. You got 1 copy of Yielding Spirit and 2 copies of Sabotage, which can all come in for Kaisa, and then Sabotage does have some more reach in other matchups. 1 copy of Block is super interesting. I think you might want this for something like Set. Set actually can beat over a lot of Master Yi's early units in combat thanks to Set Brawler, but Block might help out in that regard. Then you've got 2 copies of Adaptatron and 1 copy of Mystical Reversal for the matchups where those might be necessary. Adaptatron, of course, in the sort of Dazzling Aurora mirror matches, and then Mystic Reversal for your opponent's huge spells like Time Warp, like Cathian Rain. And what's also really interesting about a list like this is that you have the potential to smoke screen into different builds of Master Yi. And if you don't know what smoke screening is when you kind of change the entire strategy of your deck through your sideboard. So like we talked about, this is a hybrid version of Dazzling Aurora that does not have to strictly play a Dazzling Aurora strategy. Maybe in some matchups you find it relevant to side out those Dazzling Auroras. Maybe if you expect your opponent to side in Gear Hate, you can side out your Auroras, just play more of like that mid-range ramp Yi, and still work towards playing those bomb cards, and now the Gear Hate your opponent has sided in is more or less useless. Very, very cool concepts here. Very interesting stuff. Let's take a look at our 3rd place list, which is, of course, Kaisa. Taking a look at this main board, I don't see anything too out of the norm yet, except to when we get to Shakedown. Shakedown's a card that I've talked about a lot here on the channel. I think this is a really, really strong card. Many players don't like it because it gives your opponent the choice. However, if used in the right scenarios, that choice is often a lose-lose for your opponent. So what Shakedown does is you can play it at reaction speed. The 2 energy is a great cost-effective cost for Kaisa, and the 1 red power is usually mitigated by your legend. And then your opponent gets the choice. You choose one of their units. They either allow you to deal 6 damage to it, or you draw 2 cards. Now, I think the reason we don't see this card in more Kaisa builds is because Kaisa doesn't really generally need more draw power. That's actually one of the things that Kaisa is already really good at, is drawing cards, because the cards you're playing in blue and red are just so strong and they're so efficient. They either replace themselves or straight up plus you an advantage. So while I think Shakedown's a really, really cool card, not super 100% needed in Kaisa, but still solid. Not going to fault this player for playing it here. And then our bigger unit lineup looks pretty standard, although teching 1 copy of Mega Mech, which I've also been liking a lot as a 1-up tech in Kaisa. It's just a really great statted body that has your opponent kind of questioning how they're going to deal with it when you play it, which is really cool. And then in the sideboard, lots of interesting stuff. I mean, one Singularity, one Unchecked Power, sort of supplementing your Acathian Reigns. Useful in different situations, but still kind of around the realm of board removal. Unchecked Power at the right time can really be game winning. And then we have Thermo Beam, which again, as I've been playing Kai'Sa more, I see the value in this for those Aurora matchups. The Aurora matchups can be tough for Kai'Sa, so Thermo Beam, even though it is very costly, still really nice to have in the Kai'Sa sideboard. Let's take a look at our 4th place set build. Very cool. The top 4, by the way, includes 4 unique legends. You love to see it, and it's not something we really saw in the Chinese meta. The first thing I want to shout out here for the set build is 3 copies of Soaring Scout. Ever since I saw this in the 19th place list from the Shanghai National event, I've been completely sold on Soaring Scout in set because it fixes one of the problems you have in set, which is you're always playing on super low resources, and by resources I mean runes and power. Soaring Scout, it seems counterintuitive because it's not a unit that really benefits off being buffed, but once you play set more and more, you realize you're only really buffing and protecting your high priority units like the yellow and orange set, like Kiana and like Fiora. So when you can play something like Soaring Scout, just throw it in for a point. You don't really care if it lives or dies, because if it lives, you're scoring more points and gaining more tempo. If it dies, you're getting runes, so it's really a win-win situation. This list also goes for the one of Divine Judgment, which we saw also in the main board of the 19th place set list from Shanghai Nationals. I like that quite a bit. I think Divine Judgment has its solid matchups, and as a one of tech, you don't have to build your entire deck around it. If you're gonna build your entire deck around it, you'd want to play a whole lot more hidden cards like Pocket Cub and like Facebreaker to really try to set up for the Divine Judgment play, where you can take both battlefields, hide cards, and then come out on top on your opponent in terms of advantage. But yeah, I think the one of Divine Judgment is very interesting for that reason. And then going to the sideboard, honestly, a lot of tech you'd expect. 3 Unyielding Spirit for the Kai'Sa matchup, 2 Salvage for those Aurora matchups, 2 Vengeance for any matchup that's playing maybe Protect the Castle like a Green Lee Sin, and then 1 more copy of Leona Determined for stunning units in combat and not having to deal with them hitting you back. Very cool set list. I think this iterates pretty cleanly actually on the Shanghai National list. Let's take a look at our 5th place Kai'Sa build and see if we see more of the same. We do see 1 shakedown here as well. Very cool tech that I talked about earlier. We do also see 1 copy of Draven though, which I do think is another fine tech in this build. Kai'Sa is not bad at scoring quickly. I mean, it is a half red deck, and red is the aggressive color in the game. So if you can score quickly enough and then play Draven for 5, ideally you're getting a 5 might, like 6, 7, or 8 might unit, which is going to be very difficult for your opponent to deal with. And then in the sideboard, the thing I find most fascinating is that we're siding a 3rd copy of Kai'Sa Survivor. I wonder what matchup you might want this for. Maybe it's the mirror match where like you're really relying on Kai'Sa Survivor to bring you up ahead on card advantage, and then you're leaning into copies of Retreat to preserve your Kai'Sa Survivor. Maybe in line with using Retreat to preserve your Kai'Sas, you want to have more Kai'Sas in general, so that you can rush battlefields, get draws, and out-resource your opponent in the mirror. I can definitely see a world where that makes a lot of sense. And then, of course, for the mirror, you've got the Dr. Mundo as well, which can be very strong when paired with Zon Warrens. So that's one strategy you might want to be aware of in the Kai'Sa mirror, is that you don't really want to start with Zon Warrens if you can help it. You want to go for Zon Warrens in a matchup where you know you'll be siding in Mundo, because if you have Zon Warrens out in game 1 but don't have Mundo in your deck, and then you side into Mundo game 2 or 3, you're not going to be getting the most value out of your Mundo, because you're going to be losing out on those cards you could have been discarding to the trash to make Mundo all the stronger. So really cool stuff there, and something good to know about Kai'Sa matchups. And then 6th place, we have another Kai'Sa. So while the top 4 was 4 unique legends, the top 8 is consisting of a lot of Kai'Sa. This build opting for a full set of 3 shakedown, very fascinating. I think that's quite a bit on the shakedown numbers, once again only because I don't think Kai'Sa needs the extra draw power, but there might just be some things you want to snipe for 6 might, so that can definitely make sense there. And then you can combo it with things like Stupefy to also reduce your opponent's board presence. Funnily enough though, this build is actually just not playing Stupefy, which I don't personally agree with, but this player was able to get 6th place at this event, so who am I to argue? Going through though, another fascinating thing we see in this build is the 1 copy of Kai'Sa Evolutionary. Not a card that we really see in competitive Kai'Sa builds. I do wonder if there's just a matchup where you want this in your chosen champ zone, maybe something that's like not the mirror where this thing could just be falling starred, but I do wonder if this is going to be really clutch in some scenarios. If you guys know anything more about this, let me know down in the comments. Let's go ahead and take a look at our 7th place set build, looking very, very similar to the set build that we saw earlier. Maybe these players are on the same team, or maybe these players labbed together, because I can honestly see that most of this is the same, except I'm noticing like 2 first mate versus 3 in this build, some other very, very small differences, and then the sideboard, a couple of differences. I mean, a 3rd sabotage in the side deck, so I wouldn't be surprised if these players were teamed up together, or maybe just labbing and testing together. Let's take a look at our final place build for this event, which is yet another Kai'Sa. Going through our main deck, the first thing that stands out, which I absolutely love to see, is a copy of Sundisk, and I wonder if this is just a really cool one of Tech and Kai'Sa that I need to try out, because Sundisk just can be so clutch when you can set up the Legion plays. And if you play the right number of 2-drops, setting up the Legion on Sundisk is not actually too difficult, which is really, really cool. I like it quite a bit. Helps you be really aggressive. And then another tech we haven't seen in many other Kai'Sa builds is 2 copies of Vayne. The coolest thing about Vayne is every time she conquers, you can pay 1 energy to put her back in your hand, which does protect her from removal. The only downside is you actually have to reinvest the energy and the power to play her the turn after. But for 4 energy and 1 power, she does attack for a brutal 5 might, thanks to her assault 3, which is really, really strong. And then this build is also opting for 2 Mundo in the main board, but interestingly enough, no Zon Warren's Battlefield. So I wonder if this is really just like a all-in mirror match tech, or if there's some other reason why Dr. Mundo is so strong and so prioritized in this build. In the sideboard, we do see a lot of ratio fixing, except for the 3 Thermo Beam that is once again most likely there to answer the Aurora matchup, maybe the Baited Hook matchup. And so there you have it. That is the top 8 lists from this PPG Orlando Summit qualifying event. Once again, if you have more information about this tournament, where it was, how many players were in attendance, any other cool info about it, please do drop it down in the comments. If you guys enjoyed the video, please do drop a like, sub to the channel for more Riftbound content, and hype the video so that more people can learn about our awesome game. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. But for now, Joey here from 50K Comics signing off.